The Blocktalk Podcast started because of my passion for the property management industry. I wanted to start a conversation and add some value within the industry with a diverse range of people and professionals who can add something extra. As we start out, my aim is that the podcast offers some useful insight into a variety of views, opinions, thoughts, and foresights from our guests, who include business leaders and industry experts. If you enjoy the podcast and want to find out any other information, head on over to brianwelsh.co.uk. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Blocktalk Podcast with me, Brian Welsh, and Jax Bruce. Jax, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, Brian. I'm very well. I had a nice weekend. We had a community garden event in our local square, which was very well attended, and everyone enjoyed themselves. The kids did as well. So it was a really good day outdoors and tidying up the space and stuff. So it was lovely. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm looking forward to a weekend of doing nothing, because the last couple of weekends have been fairly busy. So it was. I was in London at the weekend, actually, socially.
Awesome.
So yes, I'm looking forward to some downtime. So. Cool. So today we have the pleasure of talking to Andrew Bulmer, who I've the pleasure of meeting on a number of occasions as well, who is now CEO of the newly formed Property Institute. Prior to the merger, Andrew was CEO of the IRPM and was residential director of RICS UK from 2013 to 2016. Andrew is also a media spokesperson, appearing on Radio 4 Today, Money Programme, The One Show, Sky News, and is a regular conference speaker. Andrew, thanks very much for coming on. It's great to speak to you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Hello. It's good to be here. No, I'm doing fine. It's nice to have a little bit of warm weather, and I've just come back from a week away on a narrowboat in the Welsh Valleys, so up at Llangollen. So, yeah, feeling good.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear you saying you're glad to get some warm weather, because Jack's now both in Glasgow and looking out the window, it is chucking it down. It's warm rain now today, so which is good. So, okay, so the IRPM and ARMA have now merged. Can you tell us your hopes for the future of the Property Institute and how it will benefit the industry?
I think the marriage came about really from a combination of a compelling logic, a compelling need. And also the way that the two organisations were operating. So to summarise, the IRPM is the professional body for individuals, approximately 6,000 members across the UK in the various different jurisdictions, managing big scary buildings. ARMA was England and Wales based, and the membership was firms. Around about 350 firms plus associated partners and other industry stakeholders. So ARMA did the firms and IRPM did the people, but they're in the same sectors. And there was a logic to bringing the two together, because as the building safety crisis unfolded, we found that the former ARMA chief exec, he's now exec chair of TPI, Nigel Glenn and I were in the same meetings day after day after day. And we used to joke that we saw more of each other than we did of our families, with some degree of truth. But more importantly, it was apparent that the values of the two organisations, the asks of the two organisations were the same. You couldn't get a rizzle between them.
Yeah.
And so through natural cooperation and teamwork, it became very obvious that we would be there will be a benefit to bringing the resources of the two organisations together. Now, I say that because the property management sector has got some huge challenges ahead of it. It has obviously the building safety challenge, and that's a technical challenge. It's you're doing new things, learning new stuff, but also it's a cultural change. It goes deeper than just learning a new set of rules. It's about how we think and how we approach our buildings on a safety first basis. So there's a culture change piece there. In England and Wales, of course, we've got the leasehold and common hold reform agenda, which is coming thumping down the track, and that's going to be seismic. Wherever you are on the planet, we're facing a net zero challenge. And I'm quite convinced that the property management sector has yet to get its head fully around the implications of the net zero challenge. That's not a criticism of the industry, apart from the fact that we've been distracted by Grenfell, etc. The clarity over what needs to be done to hit net zero simply isn't there. So we're on a voyage of discovery, but my goodness, this is going to be a big thing.
Yeah.
And it's going to dominate our professionals' lives for the next 20, 30 years. It'll certainly see me out. Yeah. And we're doing all that against a background of a consumer culture, which is it is going to continue to rise inexorably as our industry, which is a service industry, is compared to the service standards of Netflix and Amazon. If you're in a city now, you can get 2-hour deliveries on some Amazon stuff. Yeah. And you can track all your package. Where's my package? It's 8 stops away. Well, where's my contractor that's going to empty the overloaded bin store? They're 4 stops away. Where's that kind of information? So, the march of consumer information and consumer service will inexorably continue. Yeah. So, if you put all of those different culture changes and legal changes together, you've got a massively challenged industry. And the same will apply to many other industries, whether it's fisheries or car making or whatever. But my goodness, you need a professional body that's got a bigger engine to be able to power the industry through all of those changes. So by combining the two teams, we're now able to focus the combined two teams into the various different channels far more effectively to get more support out to members. It's important to note when we put the merger, one of the first things that we told the staff team, and we've been good to it, is that this is not about making efficiencies so that we can let people go. This is about making efficiencies because we needed to do more. And in fact, not only have we kept everyone, but we're recruiting. Yeah. So the team gets bigger and it gets more powerful. And it's about really supporting the industry. And we do that on a number of different levels, clearly qualifications and skills, but also those practical pieces of information, what we call the single side of A4. Give me a single side of A4. Tell me how to do my job on a single side of A4. Yeah. Tell me what I need to know. And that's what industry needs. That's what industry calls for. So that's what we're in the business of delivering. Okay. In terms of you asked about the hopes for the future. Yeah. I think that there are some underpinning do's, some underpinning asks. So where we would like to get to is to make sure that every property manager is competent and capable, and they and the firms they work for are customer focused. I think if they're not customer focused, they'll gradually die out as dinosaurs do. But I think beyond even that, it's about putting the industry into a place where it is behaving ethically, and so many property managers are so good and so diligent at wanting to do the right thing. We need to capture that. And if we get that right, if we get all of these components right, then we start to establish trust between customers and property managers. And out of that trust will come better relationships, less aggressive complaints. It will be more of a collaborative, hey, something's gone with our building, just letting you know so you can fix it, as opposed to you can't manage your way out of a paper bag. And it will make it a happier place both for the customers and for the property managers themselves. So it's about building trust.
Okay, yeah, that's hugely interesting actually, because a lot of the people we obviously interview a wide range of people on this podcast, and a number of CPL, my software business's clients that we've had on. That conversation about trust and service with a customer is something that everyone's striving for, but it's so difficult to provide. I mean, you guys do have there's a lot to do in there, especially when there is a huge amount of negativity. And we speak to a lot of people, maybe in the property factoring industry in Scotland, and there's definitely a lot of negativity around the whole industry. Yeah. So the steps you're trying to take forward are very good ones, because you're right. At the end of the day, it should be a two-way street. It should be a relationship rather than almost a customer supplier conversation. Yeah. So.
So when I was, I'll give you an example. When I was running my business, the staff morale was kind of dropping, and I realised it was because we were being battered by complaints all day. Mrs. Miggins' phoned to complain that the bin store's overflowing, and I quickly reset the language. So instead of it being called a complaint, it was a report. It was a problem. It was an issue. And Mrs. Miggins, thank you for being on site and being our eyes and ears on the ground. We really appreciate you working with us on this one. Yeah, we'll get the bin store cleared.
Yeah.
And of course, if we didn't get the bin store cleared, then it's a complaint.
Yeah.
But, this is and the, resetting that relationship is tricky, and it's especially tricky because it's rather like being on a desert island. Imagine being washed up on a desert island with one other person, and that other person doesn't like you and doesn't trust you. Yeah. How are you unilaterally, single-handedly going to remake that relationship? Because you're stuck with them. Yeah. You're stuck on this desert island. You're going to have to make it work. How are you going to do it? Because they're not really wanting to play ball, and they don't understand. So that's the challenge which faces our industry in terms of making that relationship. Single-handedly, we've got to learn to dance with our customers. And they're not really in the mood for dancing. So, and this it's not unique to our industry. I mean, we harp on about it a lot, and rightly, but this applies to so many other service industries. Only recently we heard the pharmacist body producing a report that said that pharmacists are being abused and assaulted and so forth. Yeah. And we've got a similar result with our wellbeing survey. Yeah. So remaking that relationship is a real challenge, but there is no other option. And smart businesses are starting to get their heads around that challenge.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's one of those things, isn't it? People in many industries, do not phone you up to tell you what a great job you're doing. They only ever phone you up when they've got a problem. And so we interviewed your colleague Malcolm Perryman on here about the wellbeing survey, and that was a hard-hitting kind of response, and the results of that survey. I mean, they were maybe not a shock to you, but they were a shock to me, but when you dig deeper and ask the questions, everyone agrees with it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so you've been working tirelessly to bring about a resolution to the ongoing cladding crisis, and this is a question we can't really avoid talking about. The most recent developments look like they're a step forward, but you said there is still a mountain to climb. Can you tell us more about that mountain and the fire safety delivery group being proposed?
Yeah, where do you start? So we're now 5 years after Grenfell, and we've got a whole lot of buildings that still haven't been fixed. And the buildings with ACM, a lot of those have been fixed, but the remain. We've got a tale of two cities here, a tale of two nations, in that there's quite an interesting compare and contrast between the way that Westminster have tackled this and the way that the Welsh and Scottish governments have tackled this. So, for example, the Scottish government has really just almost now started to realise that there's a limit to what a property manager can do, and they're becoming more interventionist in terms of getting buildings fixed. Yeah. And fighting with developers to recover where the developer was at fault. The Westminster approach has been, well, we'll collaborate and work with the housing associations to some degree, but the private sector can pretty much sort itself out. We'll just tell them to get their buildings fixed. A bit later on, it was, okay, well, we'll give you some money. Now go and get your buildings fixed. But the inability of policymakers to fully understand how leasehold works, the responsibilities and liabilities that accrue both to the landlords and to the leaseholders, I feel has probably set back the remediation process by a couple of years. Right. Genuinely, I think it's if they'd been smarter from the outset, I think we could be further down the track than where we are. But the reality is that the majority of buildings that have non-ACM cladding that's dodgy continues to be It's far too some. My phone just pinged there. Let me just.
That's all right. Don't worry.
There's still far too many of those buildings, and progress is happening on some of them. I think it's good that the government has lent on developers to get their buildings fixed. That's fine, but there are plenty of other buildings where there isn't a developer, or the developer is coming back and fixing to a standard that is starting to raise eyebrows.
Yeah.
So we get progress. More buildings are being fixed. Great. And then we start to realise that there are other worries, like is that building going to be fixed to a standard that will meet the future requirements of the regulator? Question. So there's a worry now that we're starting to build in future problems. Developer comes in, developer does work, developer leaves. 18 months later, the building goes to the regulator and it doesn't pass muster.
Right. Wow.
And part of that is down to inconsistent standards. There was the consolidated advice note from government originally, then that was changed, and the famous EWS1 form came out of that.
Yeah.
We're now going to PAS 9980, and that's fine, but that doesn't fully adhere to the Building Safety Act. I know that's south of Hadrian's Wall. So the Building Safety Act requires, holistic structural and fire safety for the building as a whole. 9980 doesn't do that entirely.
Yeah.
So we've got a complexity of standards. We've got different interests coming in to do different works, and it remains messy. And in the meantime, there are still a number of buildings that are orphaned with no developer, and new legislation has come in to prevent landlords recovering the cost of fixing those buildings from leaseholders, and unfortunately, that's going to create some traps where buildings are they're going to struggle to get the funding without the leaseholders ended up paying.
Yeah,
and I do need to be clear that I think that, and we've always held the position that leaseholders should not be paying, flat owners should not be paying for buildings that they bought in good faith. It's a moral Rubicon. It shouldn't happen. But the different jurisdictions, the different governments have taken different approaches to this, and not entirely successfully.
Yeah. Okay. So if you had the power to do what is needed to implement a solution, what would that look like?
I think the Scottish Government is moving towards it, but I think one of the best examples was from, I think it was the state of Victoria in Australia, where government rapidly realised that, rather like the VW emissions scandal, the thing is of such a scale that it requires state intervention.
Yeah.
Not necessarily state money, although that too, but state intervention to make things happen. So in the state of Australia, they determined to find the buildings, then fund the buildings and get them fixed, and then fight about the liability afterwards.
Yeah.
And for me, that remains the most sensible way, because the cost of borrowing for a government is going up, but it's still comparatively cheap.
Yeah.
£1 billion that is spent on fixing a building does not go down a plug hole. It goes into the construction sector. It pays wages, it pays corporation tax, income tax, national insurance, VAT. So you're going to get at least half of that $1 billion back straight away in taxes. And of course, it's economic stimulus. It's pumping money into an industry which then generates profits and generates the economy. So put the money in, get the buildings fixed, and then pursue the developers afterwards. And there is another side to that, which is that where you have perhaps a very large, well-funded landlord, a big pension fund. I know that's coming out of your pension and mine, which isn't great, but they do at least have the resources potentially to take on a PLC developer.
Yeah.
The idea of residents taking on a PLC developer
never going to happen.
Yeah. So the again, a state intervention to lead on that litigation, or to backstop, underwrite that litigation, again would help the industry to power through. So there are a number of things. One of the other things that we have long called for, though, was this. You mentioned it earlier. This fire safety delivery group. I think that probably the time has passed for that label, but the principle is right, which is getting people, the different stakeholders together in the same room at the same place. I mean, if you were a housing minister, surely what you do is you call everybody into a room and beat them around the ears and get them to get moving. Yeah. And that's not happened. That's not happened. Instead, conversations have always been had on a one-to-one, one-to-two basis. Yeah. And a classic example would be the way that the government have collaborated with the housing association sector quite differently from the way that they've worked with the private sector. Whereas the reality is a lot of buildings are combined, got pepper pot stock and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And some of the legislation that's come down the track, really, it kind of works in the housing association space, but it doesn't work in leasehold. And flat front fire doors are one example of that, where it looks as though the England and Wales legislation is not going to work out quite as intended. Pending legal advice. I'll call that a spoiler alert and move on.
Okay. So yeah, I get the viewpoint, because there's been a lot of money. I mean, just look at the amount of money wasted on COVID and things like that, and money that went somewhere, and there's huge amount of questions being asked about that. So, even if you do, you're right. You drop $1 billion, you're going to get half of it back, and it's going to fix a problem and also cause or not cause, but bring a huge amount of money back into the government coffers as well. So it does seem the logical thing to do. It sounds like the state of Victoria and Australia seem to have got that one right. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so we touched on this earlier, actually. The 2022 Wellbeing and Resilience Survey closed last month, I think, and we're awaiting results. What would your advice for anyone listening to help overcome difficulties in the day-to-day life of property management?
Wow, that is a big question. Okay, so the new survey results, they indicate we're still in difficulty. The first year results, and this is by the way, this is a project that was done jointly by IRPM and ARMA pre-merger.
Okay.
Because we both had the same idea, and we were starting to run with it. So we joined together and we did that. And what a good thing it was that we did, because it started the conversation.
Yeah.
And I think and it also it started to quantify the problem. This year's results say that we are 7% happier, but that's from a terribly low base, and we're still not great. In terms of advice, I would hesitate to advise any one individual or any one business, but there is a transparency about this now. There is a conversation that has been started, and it's valid to talk about it. So I think the very first thing is to recognize that this is a thing, and you're not alone, and it is something which it's valid to feel that way, and it's valid to talk about it. So I think that in itself is a big start. There's some practical advice for IRPM members on the IRPM website. There are about 8 sessions running with a psychotherapist called Adam Laidler, and I know that those have been incredibly well received. And there is signposting to other agencies who will be able to give professional advice that I certainly couldn't and shouldn't. But I think beyond that, it's you're not alone. A lot of people, not just in our industry but in other industries, are feeling very much the same way. And there is hope, and there are resources, and those resources can be found at the IRPM website.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, after we spoke to Malcolm Perryman, actually, we spoke to Gavin Percy, who runs mental health first aid courses, and the insights that he gave us were just phenomenal in this sort of area. From a business perspective, it really was quite eye-opening for me, anyway, personally. Okay, so UPRN's been talked about quite a lot. Can you give us an update on what's happening with that, and where would you like that to go?
It's making steady progress. Other stakeholders have come in to join the throng. I think one of the original letters to Chris Pincher had something like 120 stakeholders on it.
Okay, wow.
And it was it's one of those projects which is, forgive the expression, the bleeding obvious.
Yeah.
But it just needs the momentum to do it. And a classic example would be in the private rented sector. To improve safety, would it be helpful to have some mechanism knowing which properties are let out and have gas and don't have a gas certificate?
Yeah.
So, we can identify the properties. There's ways of identifying properties that are tenanted. It's not foolproof by any means. Every gas meter has its own UPRN, and if all they did was at the next time that the gas safety regime is tendered, it's tendered by government every 5 years. If that tender includes heating engineers must put the UPRN on the gas certificate, you can very quickly just do a data run and find out those properties that have tenants and gas but no gas certificate. That's a fine. That's automatic fine. What it also enables you to do is you repeat the same exercise with electrics, and very quickly you start to build up a profile of a landlord that isn't doing what they should be doing, and you can target your very limited resources on there. So that's just one tiny example of where the UPRN is going. And we were pleased to see in the Building Safety Act that the UPRN will be part of the building safety file that goes to the regulator.
Okay.
And so as the different suppliers start to pick up that database, and that data should be freely available if it is being used for regulatory purposes. The government has finally unlocked it, not completely, but for regulatory purposes they have.
Right.
Then it's going to make the collation of data a lot easier. And that has benefits all the way down the track. So, for example, a property goes on the market for sale. Well, if you've got the UPRN, you can pull various data together because the mortgage valuer is going to want to know it. The estate agent, when it goes on sale, is going to want to know it. The buyer is going to want to know it. When the buyer buys it, if they're buy to let, the tenant is going to want to know it. The letting agent is going to want to know it. Different pieces of information. The building insurer is going to want to know it. The risk manager is. So there's a property manager is going to be holding a whole load of this safety-related data, farming out different combinations, different parcels of that. Out to all sorts of different stakeholders, and using the UPRN to tie the different databases together will help to automate that and simplify that and make everyone's lives easier.
Yeah, I do a bit of work in legal as well, so I have an interest in a legal software firm, and certainly, all of the information from a conveyance and all of that sort of stuff would be, if these sort of if that information becomes readily available, it's going to be so much easier. But I guess also from the point of view of the person who's buying the property, there's just so much info could be made available about the history of that property as well. Because one of the biggest challenges, and certainly something that we speak to people about in Scotland, which I understand, well, I know is different, but is a building actually being looked after, or is it just decaying? Yeah. So because people need to look after their properties and the common areas of those properties, and this sort of information would be hugely helpful to a person buying that property, so they can make a decision.
Yeah. I mean, it's an enabling piece of technology. It's not an end in its own right. Imagine if let's wind the clock back 100 years. Imagine if there was a great big filing cabinet and all the information on a certain thing was all just put into that filing cabinet. Now you'd have access to that information. Well, in the case of the UPRN, we'll take the idea of a sort of a property logbook. People have been talking about that for 50 years. And that's some sort of great big filing cabinet system that's really complicated, and who's going to keep it and all the rest of it. Well, you don't actually need that if you've got a UPRN, which is a number plate nailed to each piece of information. The information can be held all over the place in all sorts of different databases. As long as there's an API which has access to it, you can put a request out that says, give me every piece of information that's got that UPRN nailed to it. And lo, it all just floods in and collates. It's a little bit of a halcyon dream, but you start now by creating the UPRN system. And then gradually over time, it will evolve and grow, and people tomorrow will use it for all sorts of innovative and creative purposes that we can't even dream about today. But if you don't put that foundation tag on the data, then it'll never happen.
No, I totally agree. I mean, you can't expect to get the results if you only start now. You needed to start 20 years ago. Actually, legal is an interesting one for that, or a house purchase is an interesting one for that, because for many, many years, people have tried to kind of create that one place where that talks to everything to get information about a conveyance, let's say. So, somewhere where they can grab information from the mortgage provider, from the survey provider, from everybody else that's involved in that process. And actually, there's a couple of really interesting, with a lot of funding backed businesses out there who are talking to legal software tech providers to the legal industry about these sort of things. And, right at the beginning, you sit there and go, yeah, okay, here we go. Here's another one. But actually, as the months go by, they start getting some traction. And we just need kind of one of these guys to get traction, to get an enormous amount of benefit from that. But when you've got maybe, I don't know, 150 to 200 different providers, that's a guess, yeah, to technology providers, getting every single one of them to divert the resource of the stuff that they're doing to make commercial gain in their product into a project like that, it's difficult. But there are a couple out there who are getting there. So and these sort of things would be massively beneficial to them. Yeah. So, okay. So we spoke to Susanna, your learning and development manager. How important do you think qualifications are in property management?
How important qualifications are in property management? Wow. Okay. Well, I'm biased, but I'm going to say fundamental. But picture a world where every property manager that was on your books was fully competent. They knew exactly what they were doing. They had a sure touch, a mature touch, a wise head on their shoulders. How smoothly would your business run then?
Yeah.
And so, a business needs more than just competent people. It needs to have good governance. It needs to have good systems. It needs to be up to date. That's where the business support side of TPI comes in. But from a qualifications point of view, if every property manager was, competent and confident, then you would be a long way towards having a better industry, and indeed a kinder and more enjoyable industry to work in. But it goes beyond mere technical competence. The qualifications that IRPM provided originally were great for their day, but they focused on that knowledge, the knowledge of tenure, how to invoice service charges and things like that. They've evolved dramatically over the last 4 or 5 years to the IRPM 4 elements. So you've got all that technical competence, that technical stuff that you ever used to have, but on top of that now also there is a strong focus with beefy modules on safety, on customer and consumer and those relationships and communications, and also on ethics and ethical behaviors. And so technical competence, safety, customer and ethics are the 4 elements of a property management professional. And as we develop those qualifications holistically, the objective is not just to provide professionals who have the knowledge to do their job, but actually see the industry in the round and see their place in it and where their firm sits within it, and why they're doing what they're doing. Not just technically, but also ethically and from the consumer's point of view. And so I think that modern generation of qualifications is much more powerful in preparing professionals to meet the challenges that they face today and will be coming down the track tomorrow. When I ran my business, I put everybody that I could through as many qualifications as possible. Because it helped me to train them. I could train them on the business, but if they had that technical knowledge in the first place, it gave me a great foundation to start with. And it helped me to de-risk the business. They made fewer errors, which meant that your business was more efficient, and you got a better reputation, and that generated new business. So I practiced before I preached on this, which is get your people qualified and get them up to the best standard you can, and they will be your best investment by far.
Yeah. Okay. No, I agree. You touched on it just a second ago. So you owned your own property management companies. Can you tell us a bit more about that, and also how it's helped in your roles in IRPM and now.
Sure. So I qualified as a chartered surveyor, and then I was working for a commercial practice. I was a residential surveyor working for a commercial practice. Bizarrely, don't ask. And I found myself with commercial property clients that had residential stock they wanted managing, and the business I was working for didn't do it. So, with the blessing of the partners of the day, I set up an evenings and weekends vehicle to just look after those clients, so that I didn't lose them. They didn't want to go for a multidisciplinary. They wanted a multidisciplinary practice. But that business kind of grew, and I found myself with 2 full-time jobs, and one of those was my own business, and so I made the leap at that point. So it was a kind of commercially focused, investment focused residential investment business, and that grew and branched into block management, which became much the largest side of the business. And it teaches you a lot. You learn from your mistakes. You learn, where you get your communications right and where you get your communications wrong. You learn the value of people. But I think what it does mean is that when I see a stressed out property manager, I've been there. I have been that stressed out property manager. I've had I've had that phone call from a resident demanding absolutely apoplectically furious resident demanding me and my team attend the building immediately for an emergency meeting because the decorator had painted the skirting boards the wrong shade of green. That's an actual. And I've had one of my gardeners being abused because he attended in high winds. A small tree had blown down, and one of the residents really had a go at him, because obviously he'd created the storm and knocked the tree down. So you see the difficult side of that, and I've been there and done that. And you also see teams coming together and doing a fantastic job. You're getting a bad building back into good shape. With residents who are pleased and delighted that you've come on board and you've sorted out their estate. So I've seen the highs and the lows, and I've very much lived it.
Yeah, I can imagine. So yeah, I can imagine how that helps you in your roles today, which I can imagine are very varied, and you don't have one day the same as the other.
No, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Andrew. Now, Jax normally does 3 quirky questions at the end of our podcast for a slightly lighter note. So, Jax, over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. So yes, as Brian said, this is to finish the podcast on a little bit of a lighter note. So the first question is, what's your biggest failure across your entire career, and what did you learn from it? I'm not sure if that's light or not.
Wow, what a question. My biggest failure across my entire career. Well, I'm not done yet, so
so far.
Oh wow. Gosh, I think you probably have to ask my staff that. But the one that would spring to mind would be that about 20 years ago, I set up I had a lettings business as part of the residential investment management practice I had, and I set up an internet lettings facility. So it was the forerunner, I would guess, kind of Purple Bricks, and that taught me a few things. It didn't work. It was too early. I couldn't get Rightmove to take the properties on, and without the oxygen of publicity, the thing was never going to work, and it didn't. But it taught me a few things. It taught me that the early bird might get the worm, but sometimes it's the second mouse that gets the cheese. So sometimes let somebody else do the development, and then you just look at the business model and improve on it.
Yeah.
And also that no experience is wasted, because the technology that was developed for that, with hindsight, I could have repurposed it into my own brand and gone hybrid much earlier than anybody else. But nonetheless, you learn stuff, and that and no experience, even when it's not successful, it's never wasted. You learn from it and you carry it forward.
Yeah, that's so true. I've had a recent experience of that myself, feeling like we've done something too soon. Yeah, just learn from your mistakes, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, see if you can reprogram. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you ruled the world for a day, what would you do?
Okay, first answer to that one would be I'd sleep. No, let's have a proper answer, shall we? If I ruled the world for a day, what would I do? Okay.
Well, I quite like that answer.
Just not set the alarm. Wow, okay. If I ruled the world for a day, right, I'd remove dictators and I'd introduce democracy globally. I would, but you've then got to think about how you can inform your electorate so that they can make wise decisions. So on social media, I would remove anonymity. If you're going to make some nasty comments on social media, you want your name over it, and you can be held accountable for it. And I would introduce globally fact-based media checking, so that the media news reports that we get are as unbiased as we can. And anybody that's traveled around the world, especially if you've ever driven across America listening to American talk radio, you certainly appreciate that for all its flaws and faults, how amazingly good the BBC is in this country at being at least vaguely factual in their reporting, and I think the fact that they're criticised by all sides probably means they're probably getting it about right. So yeah, I'd want fact-based checking of media.
Yeah. I mean, because media is a whole different ball game, isn't it?
There may be something else about modifying the algorithms on the likes of Twitter so that people don't get fed their own opinions back to them, which just reinforces their own views and it's an engine of extremism. So I'd probably do those things. Is that global enough for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Extreme polarisation is going to be the death of us all, I think. Great, excellent. So the final question, Andrew, is when you're 70 and look back at your life, what will you be glad you did or feel proud of? Either something you've done already or something that you still want to do?
When I'm 70. If I make it to 70, I'll be proud of that.
That's it. You're quite happy.
I survived. Yeah.
Absolutely. Fair enough.
Excellent. That's great, Andrew. It's been a pleasure to have you on. I know we've tried to do it a couple of times and we had some setbacks with some things, but that's been really, really useful. And thank you so much for coming on.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.